They laughed at the blind bride on her wedding day, never knowing they would one day beg her forgiveness. The church bell of Dry Creek rang slowly beneath the vast Texas sky, its solemn toll drifting across the dusty main street like a promise no one believed in anymore. Horses shifted restlessly at their hitching posts, leather creaking in the late afternoon heat, while townsfolk gathered in pressed suits and sun-faded dresses, whispering behind gloved hands as the desert wind curled along the wooden boardwalk. Inside the small white chapel, sunlight filtered through narrow windows, painting the aisle in ribbons of gold, and at its end stood Jonathan Hale, tall and steady, his weathered hat held respectfully over his heart. He had faced storms, droughts, and the long loneliness of the frontier, yet nothing tested his resolve like the moment he waited for the woman approaching him now. Evelyn Grace Carter stepped forward slowly, her ivory gown brushing softly against the wooden floor, her gloved hand resting gently on her father's arm. Her eyes, pale and unseeing, gazed toward a world she could no longer witness, yet her face remained serene, guided by memory and faith rather than sight. A murmur rippled through the pews, hushed at first, then rising like dry leaves caught in a restless wind. Some pitied her, others mocked what they did not understand, their judgment sharpened by ignorance rather than cruelty. "She can't even see him," a voice whispered from the back. "How's she supposed to be a rancher's wife?" Another followed, quieter but no kinder. "It's a spectacle, not a marriage." Jonathan heard every word. He did not turn. He did not answer. Instead, he watched Evelyn's careful steps, measured and unwavering, each one echoing with dignity that silenced even the restless creak of the chapel doors. Outside, the scent of sage drifted through the open windows, mingling with the faint sweetness of lavender pinned to her bouquet, the last flower she had ever seen before darkness claimed her world. She paused before him, her fingers tightening ever so slightly around the stems, as though recognizing the warmth of his presence. "Are you there?" she asked softly, her voice steady despite the tension lingering in the air. Jonathan reached for her hand, his callous fingers closing gently around hers. "I'm here," he said, his tone low and certain. "And I always will be." The whispering did not stop. It grew bolder, emboldened by numbers and sheltered behind polite smiles. The mayor shifted uncomfortably in his seat, the sheriff cleared his throat, and yet no one spoke to defend her. The frontier was a hard land, and hearts here often hardened with it. But Evelyn stood unshaken, her chin lifted, her posture graceful, as though she could sense the weight of every gaze and chose to rise above it. She could not see the judgment in their eyes, but she could feel its shadow, and still she smiled. The preacher hesitated, glancing over the congregation, as if unsure whether to continue. The silence stretched thin as wire. Then Jonathan tightened his grip on her hand, drawing strength not from the crowd, but from the quiet courage of the woman beside him. In that moment the laughter faded beneath the steady toll of the bell, and though the town believed it was witnessing a folly, destiny was quietly turning its page. For the same voices that whispered with scorn today would one day tremble with regret, and the bride they mocked would become the very soul they begged to forgive them. The preacher's voice trembled only slightly as he opened the worn leather Bible, the thin pages rustling like dry leaves in the still air, and outside the chapel a warm breeze swept across Dry Creek, carrying the scent of dust, sage, and sun-baked timber through the open windows as if the frontier itself had paused to witness what the town refused to understand. Jonathan Hale stood unwavering at the altar, his broad shoulders squared beneath the soft light, his steady gaze fixed not on the whispering congregation but on the woman before him, whose unseeing eyes reflected a quiet strength that no cruelty could dim. Evelyn Grace Carter held her bouquet of lavender close to her heart, its gentle fragrance grounding her in memory, recalling the final summer she had watched purple fields sway beneath a clear blue sky, before darkness had closed around her world like twilight that never lifted. Though she could not see the faces gathered around her, she felt their presence in the subtle shifts of breath, in the scrape of boots against pinewood floors, in the faint rustle of silk and wool as judgment moved like an unseen shadow through the pews. The mayor adjusted his silver watch chain with a tight frown. The sheriff stared at the brim of his hat, and the townsfolk leaned toward one another with thinly veiled curiosity, their hushed murmurs drifting through the chapel like dust caught in sunlight. Some believed the union foolish, others pitied it, and a few dismissed it entirely, yet none possessed the courage to speak kindness aloud. The preacher cleared his throat, his voice finding strength in the sacred words as he asked Jonathan if he would take Evelyn as his lawful wife, to cherish and honor her for as long as he lived. Without hesitation, Jonathan answered, his tone firm and resonant, carrying through the chapel with the clarity of a church bell at dawn. I will. The simplicity of his vow silenced even the most skeptical whispers, for it held no trace of doubt, only devotion born from something deeper than sight. When the question turned to Evelyn, she lifted her chin gently, her lips parting with calm resolve, her voice soft yet unwavering. I will. The words flowed like a quiet prayer, filling the space with a grace that seemed to soften the very air. And for a fleeting moment even the harshest hearts felt the weight of their own silence. As Jonathan slipped the gold band onto her finger, its surface warm from his touch, her breath caught in a fragile whisper of emotion, and she smiled not at the faces around her but toward the sound of his heartbeat, trusting it more than any promise spoken before witnesses. Outside, a lone horse neighed in the distance, and the chapel bell swayed gently in the wind, its rope creaking with a slow, solemn rhythm that echoed across the town like an unseen omen. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the words hung in the air like sunlight after a storm, yet the applause that followed was scattered and uncertain, more polite than heartfelt. A few clapped with genuine warmth, but many remained still, their hesitation louder than any cheer. Jonathan offered his arm, and Evelyn accepted it with quiet confidence, her fingers resting lightly upon his sleeve as they turned toward the chapel doors. Each step down the aisle carried them past rows of doubtful eyes, yet neither faltered, their pace measured and dignified, as though they walked not through scorn but through destiny itself. The golden light of late afternoon spilled across the threshold as the doors opened, illuminating their path with a radiance that seemed almost sacred. Beyond the chapel steps, Dry Creek stretched beneath the endless Texas sky, its wooden storefronts and dusty streets bearing silent witness to a promise the town had not yet learned to honor. And though whispers lingered like distant thunder behind them, the wind carried something else into the fading light, a quiet certainty that the vows spoken within those walls would one day reshape the hearts of all who had doubted them. The sun hung low over Dry Creek as Jonathan Hale guided Evelyn Grace Carter down the wooden steps of the chapel, its warm light spilling across the dusty street like liquid gold, illuminating every weathered storefront and casting long shadows that stretched toward the horizon. The late afternoon air carried the scent of leather, hay, and distant mesquite smoke, while the gentle creak of a swinging sign echoed above the murmuring townsfolk gathered along the boardwalk. Jonathan kept his arm steady beneath Evelyn's hand, his presence firm and reassuring, as she stepped carefully onto the sunlit ground, her satin shoes brushing against the fine Texas dust. Though she could not see the curious eyes fixed upon her, she felt them, their weight lingering in the hush that followed their emergence, a silence that spoke louder than any laughter. The town of Dry Creek had seen cattle drives, droughts, and storms that split the sky in two, yet nothing unsettled it quite like the quiet dignity of a blind bride walking with her head held high. Evelyn tilted her face slightly toward the warmth of the sun, a soft smile touching her lips as she breathed in the fragrance of lavender and dry earth, anchoring herself in the moment. "Is it beautiful?" she asked gently, her voice carrying a note of wonder that softened even the hardest expressions nearby. Jonathan glanced at the endless blue sky stretching above the rooftops, at the white clouds drifting like slow-moving ships across the vast Texas expanse. "Yes," he answered, his tone low and certain. "It is beautiful. And so are you." A few bystanders shifted uncomfortably, their earlier whispers fading into awkward silence, while others exchanged glances heavy with doubt they dared not voice aloud. The mayor stood near the steps, his polished boots stirring the dust, offering a stiff nod that lacked warmth, and Sheriff Douglas Hale adjusted his badge as if searching for words that would not come. Across the street, children paused in their play, watching with wide eyes, their innocence untouched by the prejudice that shadowed their elders. A woman in a pale blue dress clasped her hands together, her expression wavering between pity and admiration, as if witnessing something she could not fully understand. Jonathan led Evelyn toward a modest buckboard waiting at the edge of the street, its chestnut horse flicking its tail in the heat, harness jingling softly with each restless shift. He helped her climb aboard with gentle care, his calloused hands guiding her with quiet respect, never once treating her blindness as a burden, only as a truth to be honored. As he settled beside her, the wheels creaked forward, rolling slowly along the sun-baked road, and the steady rhythm of iron-rimmed wheels against packed earth echoed through the town like the ticking of a distant clock. Evelyn rested her hand upon his, her fingers tracing the gold band that now bound their lives together. "They do not approve," she said softly, her voice devoid of bitterness, as if she had expected nothing more. Jonathan tightened his grip around hers, his gaze fixed ahead toward the open prairie stretching beyond the last row of buildings. "Approval fades," he replied, "but truth endures." The buckboard passed beneath the wooden arch marking the edge of Dry Creek, and the town slowly receded behind them, its whispers dissolving into the rustle of wind through tall prairie grass. The horizon opened wide, painted in hues of amber and rose as the sun dipped lower, and somewhere in the distance a meadowlark's song drifted through the stillness, pure and unbroken. Evelyn lifted her face toward the sound, her smile deepening as she listened. She could not see the rolling plains or the fading light, yet she sensed the vastness before her, a future shaped not by the judgment of others but by the quiet strength of love and faith. As the ranch came into view, framed by a split-rail fence and a weathered barn standing proud against the endless sky, Jonathan slowed the horse, knowing that beyond those gates lay both refuge and trials yet to come. And though the dust of Dry Creek settled behind them, the echoes of that day lingered in the wind, carrying with them a silent promise that the town, which doubted them now, would one day learn the cost of its scorn. Morning arrived gently over the Hale Ranch, painting the Texas prairie in shades of amber, and rose as the first light of dawn stretched across miles of whispering grass. A cool breeze drifted through the open fields, carrying the scent of dew, hay and sun-warmed earth, while the distant lowing of cattle blended with the rhythmic creak of the windmill turning against the pale sky. Jonathan Hale stepped onto the wooden porch with a steaming tin cup in his hand, his boots brushing softly against the weathered planks as he watched the horizon awaken. Behind him, the screen door opened with a delicate sigh, and Evelyn Grace Carter emerged into the morning light, guided by memory and the gentle touch of her fingertips along the railing. She paused as the sunlight warmed her face, tilting her head slightly as if greeting an old friend. "It feels like gold," she said softly, her voice touched with quiet wonder. Jonathan smiled, setting his cup aside before offering his arm. "That is the Texas sun," he replied. "It rises slow and proud, just like you." She slipped her hand into the crook of his elbow, her steps careful but confident, her white dress now replaced by a simple calico gown that brushed against her ankles with each measured stride. Together they descended the porch steps, the dry grass whispering beneath their feet as they walked toward the barn, where the scent of leather and fresh hay lingered in the stillness of the early hour. Life on the frontier was unforgiving, yet Evelyn embraced it with quiet determination, learning the rhythm of the ranch through sound, touch, and instinct. She traced the smooth wood of the fence rails, memorized the path between the house and the well, and recognized the gentle nicker of the chestnut horse before it came into view. Each day she grew more certain, moving with a grace that spoke not of limitation but of resilience. Jonathan watched her with silent admiration, knowing that strength was not measured by sight but by courage. By midday the sun climbed high above the endless sky, casting sharp shadows across the open range as Evelyn sat beneath the shade of a sprawling oak tree near the porch. A small basket rested beside her, filled with folded linens and sprigs of lavender. She had gathered and dried, their delicate fragrance drifting through the warm air. Her fingers moved skillfully over a length of fabric as she stitched, guided by patience and practice, while meadowlarks sang in the distance and cicadas hummed like a quiet lullaby. The ranch, once lonely and silent, now carried the gentle music of her presence. Yet beyond the rolling prairie, Dry Creek lingered in memory like a distant storm cloud. From time to time, passing riders slowed along the road that bordered the Hale property, their curious glances betraying the rumors that had begun to ripple through the town. Some came under the pretense of trade, their voices polite but uncertain, while others watched from afar, whispering tales shaped by ignorance rather than truth. Evelyn sensed the tension in the air whenever strangers approached, though she never spoke of it. Instead, she lifted her chin and greeted them with kindness, her composure unwavering, her dignity untouched. One afternoon, as the golden light of sunset stretched across the fields, Jonathan returned from tending the far pasture to find her standing near the fence, her face turned toward the wind as it carried the distant toll of the Dry Creek church bell. The sound drifted across the miles, faint yet unmistakable. "They are speaking of us again," she said gently, her voice calm as the fading light. Jonathan rested his hands upon the fence beside her, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sky blazed with hues of crimson and amber. "Let them speak," he answered quietly. "Time has a way of teaching truths that words cannot." Evelyn smiled softly, her fingers brushing the gold band upon her hand as the evening breeze stirred her hair. The prairie stretched before them in endless silence, vast and patient, as if waiting for a story yet to unfold. And as the last rays of sunlight slipped beneath the horizon, a quiet certainty settled in the twilight, that the same town which once doubted her would soon discover the strength hidden within the blind bride they had failed to understand. The days that followed unfolded like pages of a quiet hymn, each sunrise gilding the Hale Ranch with soft light and each sunset painting the endless Texas sky in hues of amber and rose, until the rhythm of frontier life became as familiar to Evelyn Grace Carter as the beating of her own heart. She rose with the dawn, guided by the gentle warmth of sunlight on her skin and the distant crow of a rooster carried across the prairie, her steps measured yet confident as she moved through the modest ranch house. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm cornbread filled the air, mingling with the earthy fragrance of leather and pinewood, while Jonathan Hale prepared for the long hours ahead, his presence steady and reassuring. Evelyn learned the language of the ranch through sound and touch, tracing the smooth grain of the kitchen table, memorizing the creak of each floorboard, and recognizing the familiar chime of the windmill turning against the wide open sky. She counted her steps from the porch to the garden, from the well to the barn, until the once foreign land became a map etched gently into her memory. Her hands moved with quiet skill as she kneaded dough, stitched worn garments, and arranged sprigs of dried lavender in small bundles that perfumed the house with delicate sweetness, transforming the humble dwelling into a sanctuary of warmth and grace. Word of her perseverance traveled slowly beyond the ranch, carried by passing traders and ranch hands who stopped at the Hale property for water or rest, their curiosity softened by the kindness they encountered. They spoke of the blind bride who greeted strangers with a gentle smile, whose voice was calm as the prairie wind, and whose dignity commanded respect without ever demanding it. Some left with newfound admiration, while others returned to Dry Creek with stories that unsettled long-held assumptions, planting seeds of doubt in hearts once hardened by prejudice. One warm afternoon, as the cicadas sang beneath the relentless Texas sun, a weary rider approached the ranch, his horse coated in dust from miles of travel. Jonathan offered him shade and cool water, while Evelyn listened from the porch, her head tilted slightly as she sensed the man's exhaustion in the slow cadence of his breath. She brought him a glass of lemonade sweetened with honey, her hand steady and sure, and he accepted it with quiet gratitude. "Ma'am," he said softly, his voice tinged with awe, "they say you cannot see, yet you move as though guided by light." Evelyn smiled gently, her unseeing eyes reflecting the warmth of the afternoon. "There are many ways to see," she replied. "Some are felt, not witnessed." The rider tipped his hat, deeply moved, and when he departed, he carried her words with him like a truth too powerful to forget. As summer deepened, golden fields swayed beneath the endless sky, and the Hale Ranch flourished with renewed life, its fences repaired, its cattle thriving, and its home filled with quiet laughter carried on the evening breeze. Yet beyond the rolling plains, the town of Dry Creek remained restless, its whispers growing softer but more uncertain with each passing day. Rumors spread not of folly but of grace, not of weakness but of strength. Even those who once mocked her began to listen with reluctant curiosity, their certainty eroded by the steady tide of truth. One evening, as twilight settled gently over the prairie, Jonathan found Evelyn standing near the garden, her fingers brushing the petals of blooming wildflowers. The sky blazed with the fading light of sunset, and the wind carried the distant toll of the church bell across the open land. "Do you hear it?" she asked softly, her voice serene. Jonathan nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Yes," he said. "Dry Creek." Evelyn folded her hands over her heart, her expression peaceful and resolute. "One day," she whispered, "they will understand." Jonathan took her hand in his voice firm with quiet conviction. "And when they do, they will come seeking the forgiveness they once believed you did not deserve." As the last light of day faded into starlit silence, the prairie stretched vast and patient beneath the heavens, and the wind carried a promise across the darkening fields, that time, like truth, never forgets its way home. Autumn arrived upon the Texas prairie with a quiet majesty, brushing the endless fields in shades of burnished gold and amber as a gentle chill softened the once relentless heat of summer, and the wind carried the scent of dry grass and distant mesquite through the wide-open sky. At the Hale Ranch, the rhythm of life moved with steady purpose, guided by the turning seasons and the quiet strength of those who called it home. Evelyn Grace Carter stood on the porch as the morning sun warmed her face, her fingers resting lightly on the smooth railing as she listened to the rustle of leaves dancing across the yard. The familiar creak of the windmill spun its patient melody, and the low murmur of cattle drifting across the pasture told her that another day had begun. Behind her, Jonathan Hale adjusted his hat and stepped into the light, his boots tapping softly against the wooden boards. He paused for a moment, watching his wife with quiet admiration, knowing that though she could not see the horizon stretching for miles, she understood its beauty in ways sight alone could never reveal. "The air feels different," Evelyn said gently, her voice touched with wonder. "It carries the promise of change." Jonathan smiled. "Harvest season is near," he replied. "The land is preparing to rest." She turned toward the sound of his voice, her expression serene. "And so are the hearts of men," she whispered, as though sensing something beyond the distant hills. In the weeks that followed, the ranch flourished beneath the golden light of autumn. Evelyn worked beside Jonathan with unwavering dedication, her hands skillfully sorting herbs, mending linens, and preparing preserves from the season's yield. She memorized every corner of the homestead, moving with confidence along paths she had traced countless times, her steps guided by instinct and trust. Visitors came more often now, drawn not by curiosity alone but by quiet respect. Ranchers traveling from distant counties paused to trade supplies, and weary riders stopped for water and rest, leaving with stories of the blind woman whose grace seemed to calm even the harshest frontier spirits. Her reputation spread across the plains like the whisper of the wind, reaching beyond the borders of Dry Creek, and settling gently into hearts once clouded by doubt. One crisp afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the prairie in hues of crimson and bronze, a wagon approached the Hale Ranch carrying a woman and her young son. The boy coughed softly, his breath uneven from the dust of the long journey, and his mother's voice trembled with worry as she explained their plight. Evelyn welcomed them with gentle reassurance, her calm presence easing the mother's fear. She prepared a soothing herbal remedy from lavender and chamomile, her hands steady as she worked, guided by memory and care. "Drink slowly," she told the child, her voice warm as the autumn sun. "Rest and you will grow stronger." The boy obeyed, and as the evening settled into a tranquil hush, his breathing steadied, bringing tears of gratitude to his mother's eyes. "Thank you," the woman whispered. "The town said you were helpless. They were wrong." Evelyn smiled softly. "Helplessness is not found in darkness," she replied. "It is found in the absence of compassion." Word of the boy's recovery traveled swiftly back to Dry Creek, carried by grateful hearts and honest voices. The whispers that once mocked her began to soften, replaced by quiet reflection and growing remorse. Even those who had doubted her felt a stirring of conscience, as though the prairie wind itself had carried truth to their doors. That evening, as the first stars shimmered above the vast Texas sky, Jonathan joined Evelyn by the fence overlooking the open fields. The distant glow of lantern light flickered on the horizon, hinting at travelers bound for the town that had once turned its back on them. "They are beginning to understand," he said quietly. Evelyn tilted her face toward the cool night air, her expression peaceful. "Understanding comes slowly," she replied. "But when it arrives, it brings humility with it." Jonathan took her hand, the gold band glinting faintly beneath the starlight, and together they stood in the gentle silence of the prairie. Beyond the rolling hills, Dry Creek stirred with unspoken regret, its people awakening to the truth they had long refused to see. And in the stillness of that autumn night, carried upon the whisper of the wind, destiny moved ever closer, guiding the town toward the day it would seek forgiveness from the woman it had once failed to understand. Winter approached the Texas prairie with a quiet breath of silver frost, laying a pale shimmer across the rolling fields as the wind carried a crisp stillness through the endless sky. And at the Hale Ranch the morning sun rose slowly, casting long bands of light over the barn and fence posts that stood like sentinels against the horizon. Jonathan Hale saddled his horse near the corral, the soft jingle of the reins blending with the distant lowing of cattle, while Evelyn Grace Carter stood near the porch, Her hands wrapped around a warm tin cup as she listened to the familiar rhythm of ranch life awakening. The air was cooler now, scented with cedar smoke and dry grass, and each breath felt like a promise whispered by the land itself. Evelyn tilted her face toward the faint warmth of dawn, her unseeing eyes serene as she listened to the gentle turning of the windmill. "The frost has come," she said softly. Jonathan smiled, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. "Yes," he replied. "Winter is on its way." She nodded, sensing the quiet change in the world around her. "The earth prepares for rest," she murmured, "and hearts prepare for truth." As the weeks passed, travelers arrived more frequently along the road that cut through the prairie, their wagons creaking beneath the pale winter sun. Some came seeking trade, others carried letters or supplies, but all departed with stories of the Hale Ranch and the woman whose kindness seemed to warm even the coldest days. Her gentle voice and steady hands had become a refuge for the weary, and her reputation spread across the frontier like the glow of a lantern in the night. One afternoon, as the sky shimmered with a thin veil of winter clouds, a familiar rider approached the ranch, his horse moving at a measured pace. It was Sheriff Douglas Hale, his star-shaped badge catching the faint light as he dismounted near the gate. Jonathan greeted him with a firm handshake, while Evelyn listened from the porch, recognizing the authority in his footsteps. "Sheriff," she said gently, inclining her head in polite acknowledgement. He removed his hat, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Mrs. Hale," he replied. "I hope I am not intruding." Jonathan gestured toward the porch. "You are always welcome here." The sheriff hesitated before speaking, as though weighing words he had long kept unspoken. "Dry Creek has heard much about you," he said quietly. "More than rumors now. Stories of kindness, of healing, of grace." Evelyn folded her hands gently before her. "Stories often travel farther than truth," she answered with humility. The sheriff looked toward the distant outline of the town on the horizon. "This time they carry both," he said. "There are those who regret their judgments. They speak of returning here, not in mockery, but in respect." A hush settled over the porch, broken only by the rustle of the winter wind through brittle grass. Jonathan watched Evelyn, waiting for her response. She remained still, her expression peaceful, her voice calm as the quiet prairie. "Regret is the first step toward understanding," she said. "But understanding must be followed by sincerity." Sheriff Hale nodded slowly, as though her words lifted a weight from his conscience. "Then perhaps the town still has hope," he replied. As the sheriff departed, the fading light of afternoon stretched across the land, and a golden glow settled over the ranch like a benediction. Jonathan joined Evelyn at the fence, their hands entwined as they gazed toward the distant outline of Dry Creek. The wind carried the faint echo of a church bell from miles away, its solemn toll drifting across the open prairie. "They are beginning to change," Jonathan said quietly. Evelyn lifted her face toward the sound, her gentle smile illuminated by the soft light of sunset. "Every heart has its season," she whispered. "Some awaken slowly, like winter yielding to spring." The sky deepened into shades of violet and silver as the first stars emerged above the vast Texas expanse, and in the tranquil silence of the approaching night, a quiet certainty took root upon the land. Beyond the rolling hills, Dry Creek stirred with unspoken remorse, its people drawing closer to a truth they could no longer ignore, and carried upon the cold winter wind was the promise that the day of reckoning and redemption was steadily approaching. The first snow of winter arrived upon the Texas prairie like a whispered secret, dusting the endless fields in a veil of silver that shimmered beneath the pale morning sun, and at the Hale Ranch the world seemed hushed, as though time itself had paused to listen. Frost clung to the fence posts and traced delicate patterns across the window panes, while the wind carried the faint scent of cedar smoke drifting from the chimney. Evelyn Grace Carter stood near the hearth, her hands resting lightly on the smooth wooden mantel as she listened to the crackle of the fire, its warmth spreading gently through the quiet room. Outside, the rhythmic creak of the windmill turned slowly against the winter sky, and the distant lowing of cattle drifted across the land like a quiet hymn. Jonathan Hale fastened his coat and stepped onto the porch, his boots leaving soft impressions in the thin blanket of snow. He paused to watch the horizon, where the vast Texas sky stretched wide and pale, and in the distance a line of riders emerged along the road from Dry Creek. Their silhouettes moved steadily through the morning light, wagons rolling behind them, wheels crunching against the frost-kissed earth. Jonathan's gaze sharpened, his breath visible in the cold air as he counted the approaching figures. There were more than a handful, their progress unhurried, their formation solemn rather than threatening. He sensed no hostility in their approach, only a gravity that stirred something deep within his heart. Inside the house, Evelyn tilted her head slightly, her expression serene yet attentive. "Someone is coming," she said softly, her voice calm as still water. Jonathan turned toward her, his tone gentle but steady. "Yes," he replied. "From Dry Creek." She stood in thoughtful silence, her fingers brushing the gold band upon her hand. The faint jingle of harnesses and the creak of wagon wheels grew louder, carried on the winter wind, until at last the procession came to a halt before the Hale Ranch. Men and women stepped down from their wagons, their breath rising in pale clouds against the cold, their faces etched with humility rather than pride. The mayor removed his hat, his expression solemn, while Sheriff Douglas Hale stood beside him, his eyes lowered in quiet respect. Behind them gathered the townsfolk of Dry Creek, their numbers forming a silent assembly beneath the open sky, each one bearing the weight of unspoken regret. Jonathan opened the door and offered Evelyn his arm. She accepted it with calm grace, her steps measured and confident as they walked onto the porch together. The winter sun illuminated her face, and though her eyes could not see the crowd before her, her presence radiated a quiet dignity that commanded reverence. A hush settled over the gathering, broken only by the whisper of the wind across the snow-dusted prairie. The mayor stepped forward, his voice unsteady as he spoke. "Mrs. Hale," he said, removing his hat, "we have come not as judges but as those who have wronged you." The words hung in the air, heavy with sincerity. "We mocked what we did not understand," he continued, his voice trembling with remorse. "We mistook kindness for weakness and blindness for helplessness. For that, we humbly ask your forgiveness." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and one by one, the townspeople bowed their heads, their silence speaking louder than any apology. Evelyn stood still, her hands folded gently before her, her face illuminated by the soft winter light. She listened not to their words alone, but to the sincerity carried within them. Jonathan watched her quietly, knowing the choice was hers alone. After a long and reverent pause, she stepped forward, her voice gentle as falling snow. "Forgiveness is not given because it is deserved," she said softly. "It is given because it is needed." The wind stilled, as though the prairie itself held its breath. She lifted her chin, a serene smile touching her lips. "If your hearts have truly changed, then let this day be remembered not for shame, but for understanding." The townspeople looked up, relief and gratitude softening their faces as her words washed over them like warmth after winter's chill. The mayor's eyes glistened with emotion, and Sheriff Hale placed his hand over his heart in silent respect. As the pale sun climbed higher above the vast Texas sky, its golden light shimmered across the frost-covered fields, illuminating the quiet assembly with a promise of renewal. And in that sacred stillness beneath the boundless heavens, Dry Creek found redemption in the grace of the woman it had once failed to see, learning at last that true vision is born not of sight, but of compassion. The winter sun lingered gently above the Hale Ranch, casting a pale golden glow across the frost-dusted prairie as the townspeople of Dry Creek stood in reverent silence, their breath rising in soft clouds that drifted into the still morning air. The apology had been spoken and forgiveness had been granted, yet the moment lingered with a quiet gravity, as though the land itself bore witness to a truth long overdue. Evelyn Grace Carter stood beside Jonathan Hale on the porch, her posture poised and serene, her unseeing eyes lifted toward the warmth of the sunlight. Though she could not behold the humbled faces before her, she felt the sincerity in their silence, the trembling humility carried in each bowed head. The mayor stepped forward once more, his voice steadier now, yet softened by gratitude. "Mrs. Hale," he said respectfully, "your grace has given our town more than forgiveness. It has given us a chance to become better than we were." Behind him, Sheriff Douglas Hale removed his hat and pressed it gently to his chest. "Dry Creek owes you a debt that cannot be measured in gold," he added. "If ever you have need of us, you will find us ready." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, carried on the crisp winter wind like the rustling of distant leaves. Farmers, merchants, mothers, and children stepped forward in quiet unity, their expressions no longer shadowed by doubt, but illuminated by newfound respect. One elderly woman approached with careful steps, holding a basket lined with fresh bread and preserves. Her hands trembled slightly as she offered it. "For your kindness," she said softly. Evelyn accepted the gift with a gentle smile, her fingertips brushing the woven handle. "Thank you," she replied. "May this be the beginning of understanding between us." Nearby, a young boy stepped forward, clutching his mother's hand. He gazed at Evelyn with innocent curiosity, his voice small but earnest. "Ma'am," he asked, "is it true that you see with your heart?" A hush fell over the gathering as Evelyn turned toward the sound of his voice. Her smile warmed like the first light of spring. "Yes," she answered softly, "and when you learn to do the same, you will see the world more clearly than ever before." The child's eyes shone with wonder, and his mother bowed her head in silent gratitude. Jonathan watched the exchange with quiet pride, his hand resting protectively over Evelyn's. The prairie wind stirred her hair, carrying with it the faint toll of the distant church bell, its solemn melody echoing across the open land like a promise fulfilled. As the sun climbed higher, the frost began to melt, revealing the rich brown earth beneath, a silent symbol of renewal. Wagons that had once approached in judgment now stood as instruments of reconciliation, their owners offering supplies, seeds, and tools to support the Hale Ranch. The mayor pledged assistance in rebuilding a damaged fence line along the northern pasture, while merchants promised fair trade and honest dealings. What had once been a divide between the town and the ranch was now bridged by humility and respect. Evelyn listened to each offer with grace, accepting not as one owed a debt, but as one welcoming fellowship. "Let this day be remembered," she said gently, her voice carrying across the gathering. "Not as the end of regret, but as the beginning of unity." The townspeople nodded, their hearts stirred by her words, and one by one they offered their farewells, mounting their horses and climbing into their wagons. As they departed, they did so not in silence born of shame, but in reverence shaped by gratitude. Sheriff Hale lingered a moment longer, tipping his hat before turning back toward Dry Creek. Soon, the sound of hoofbeats faded into the vastness of the Texas prairie, leaving behind only the whisper of the wind and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. Jonathan and Evelyn remained upon the porch, hand in hand, as the winter sun bathed the land in gentle light. "Do you hear it?" Jonathan asked quietly. Evelyn listened as the distant church bell echoed once more, carried across the endless horizon. "Yes," she replied with a serene smile. "It sounds like hope." And as the day unfolded beneath the boundless sky, the Hale Ranch stood as a beacon of grace upon the frontier, a testament to the power of compassion to heal wounded hearts, and a reminder that true vision is not found in sight alone, but in the courage to forgive and the wisdom to change. Spring arrived upon the Texas prairie with a gentle breath of renewal, melting the last traces of winter and awakening the earth beneath a boundless sky of pale blue. And at the Hale Ranch the morning sun rose warm and golden, spilling light across fields where new grass shimmered with dew like scattered diamonds. The wind carried the sweet scent of wildflowers and freshly turned soil, and the steady creak of the windmill blended with the distant song of meadowlarks welcoming the season of rebirth. Jonathan Hale stood near the fence line, his hands resting upon the smooth cedar rails as he surveyed the thriving pastures, their rolling expanse stretching toward the horizon in hues of emerald and gold. Beside him, Evelyn Grace Carter moved with quiet confidence along the garden path, her fingertips brushing the budding leaves of lavender and sage, each step guided by memory, trust, and the gentle music of the land she had come to call home. The ranch no longer echoed with solitude, but with life and purpose, its rhythm shaped by compassion and perseverance. Wagons from Dry Creek arrived regularly now, bringing seeds, tools, and letters of gratitude, their wheels no longer stirring whispers of doubt but songs of respect carried on the prairie wind. Children often accompanied their parents, their laughter bright as the morning sun, and they gathered eagerly around Evelyn as she taught them to recognize herbs by scent and texture, her voice warm with patience. "Close your eyes," she would say softly, placing a sprig of lavender into their hands. "True understanding begins when you listen with your heart." The children obeyed, giggling at first, then falling silent as they discovered the delicate fragrance, their young minds awakening to a lesson far greater than knowledge. Word of her wisdom spread across neighboring counties, drawing travelers from miles away who sought her guidance and kindness, and each departed with renewed faith in the quiet strength she embodied. One radiant afternoon, as wildflowers swayed gently beneath the endless Texas sky, Sheriff Douglas Hale arrived once more, his horse moving at an easy pace along the sunlit road. He dismounted near the porch and tipped his hat respectfully. "Mrs. Hale," he greeted with a gentle smile, "Dry Creek has not forgotten what it owes you." Evelyn inclined her head with grace. "Nor have I forgotten what Dry Creek has become," she replied. The sheriff presented a folded document bearing the official seal of the town. "By unanimous vote," he said with quiet pride, "the citizens of Dry Creek wish to dedicate a new schoolhouse in your honor, as a place of learning for every child, regardless of circumstance." Jonathan's eyes softened with gratitude as he looked toward Evelyn, whose hands trembled ever so slightly at the significance of the gesture. "It is a gift I cannot accept for myself," she said gently, "but if it serves to teach compassion and understanding, then I accept it for the children." The sheriff nodded, his expression filled with admiration. "That is precisely why it bears your name." As he departed, the sound of hoofbeats faded into the warm afternoon breeze, leaving behind a quiet sense of fulfillment that settled gently upon the land. That evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of rose and amber, Jonathan guided Evelyn to the porch swing, where they sat side by side, their hands entwined as they listened to the soft chorus of crickets rising from the fields. The distant church bell of Dry Creek echoed across the prairie, its solemn chime no longer a reminder of judgment, but a symbol of unity and renewal. "Do you hear it?" Jonathan asked softly. Evelyn smiled, her face lifted toward the fading light. "Yes," she replied. "It sounds like a promise kept." The wind carried the fragrance of blooming wildflowers through the twilight, and the stars began to shimmer one by one across the vast Texas sky. In that peaceful silence, the Hale Ranch stood as a beacon upon the frontier, a testament to grace, dignity, and forgiveness. And as the prairie stretched endlessly beneath the heavens, it whispered a truth carried on every breath of the wind, that compassion has the power to transform hearts, and that those who once walked in darkness can guide the world toward the light. Summer returned to the Texas prairie with a radiant warmth that bathed the Hale Ranch in golden light, turning the rolling fields into a shimmering sea of emerald beneath an endless sky of blue. And the wind carried the sweet fragrance of wildflowers through the open land as the steady creak of the windmill echoed like a familiar melody. The dedication of the Dry Creek schoolhouse had drawn visitors from miles away, and on a bright morning in early June, wagons lined the dusty road leading into town, their wheels crunching softly against the sun-baked earth. Jonathan Hale guided Evelyn Grace Carter along the wooden boardwalk, his arm steady beneath her hand, as the distant toll of the church bell welcomed them back to the town that had once cast them aside. The warmth of the sunlight touched her face, and though her eyes could not behold the bustling street, she sensed the quiet reverence in the air, the absence of whispers that had once followed her steps. Instead, there were greetings filled with sincerity, hats lifted in respect, and voices softened with admiration. The storefronts of Dry Creek stood polished and proud, adorned with ribbons of white and blue, and wildflowers gathered by the townsfolk framed the entrance to the newly built schoolhouse, their colors vibrant beneath the summer sun. Children gathered eagerly near the steps, their laughter ringing like silver bells, while their parents stood behind them with expressions of gratitude and humility. Sheriff Douglas Hale approached with a warm smile, tipping his hat as he extended his arm. "Mrs. Hale," he said with quiet pride, "Dry Creek is honored by your presence." Evelyn inclined her head gracefully. "It is I who am honored," she replied gently. "To witness such kindness is a blessing greater than sight." The mayor stepped forward, his voice steady and resonant as he addressed the assembled crowd. "Today we celebrate not only the opening of this schoolhouse," he declared, "but the triumph of compassion over ignorance and humility over pride." A ripple of applause spread through the gathering, carried on the warm summer breeze. He turned toward Evelyn, his eyes filled with respect. "May this place stand for generations as a testament to the grace that transformed our town." Jonathan guided Evelyn toward the entrance, where a silk ribbon stretched across the doorway. A pair of golden scissors rested upon a velvet cushion, placed there with solemn care. The crowd fell silent as Evelyn reached forward, her hand steady and sure as she accepted the instrument. "Education opens the eyes of the mind," she said softly, her voice carrying across the sunlit square. May this school teach every child not only to read and write, but to see with compassion. With a gentle motion, she cut the ribbon, and a cheer rose into the clear Texas sky, echoing across the rooftops like a song of redemption. Children rushed forward with bright smiles, their laughter filling the air with joy as they stepped into the new schoolhouse, guided by hope and curiosity. A young girl approached Evelyn, offering a small bouquet of freshly picked daisies. "Thank you, ma'am," she said shyly. "My teacher says you showed our town how to be kind." Evelyn knelt slightly, accepting the flowers with a warm smile. "Then promise me you will always be kind in return," she replied. The child nodded earnestly, her eyes shining with understanding. As the ceremony concluded, music drifted through the square, and townspeople gathered in celebration beneath the radiant summer sun. Jonathan and Evelyn stood together near the schoolhouse steps, their hands entwined, listening to the joyful hum of a community reborn. The distant chime of the church bell rang once more, no longer a reminder of past judgment, but a symbol of unity forged through forgiveness. "Do you hear it?" Jonathan asked softly. Evelyn lifted her face toward the sound, her smile serene and luminous. "Yes," she whispered. "It sounds like a future filled with light." As the sun dipped toward the western horizon, casting long golden rays across the prairie, Dry Creek stood transformed, its streets no longer defined by prejudice but by grace. And in the gentle glow of that summer evening, the legacy of a blind bride who had seen with her heart continued to guide the town toward a brighter tomorrow, reminding all who gathered there that true vision is born not from sight, but from compassion, wisdom, and the courage to forgive. Autumn returned once more to the Texas prairie, gentle and golden, laying a warm glow across the rolling fields as the wind whispered through tall grasses and carried the faint scent of ripened grain toward the Hale ranch. The sun drifted low in the sky, painting the horizon in hues of amber and crimson, and the steady creak of the windmill turned like a faithful sentinel against the endless expanse. Seasons had come and gone since the day Dry Creek sought forgiveness, and with each passing year the bond between the town and the ranch had grown stronger, shaped not by obligation but by gratitude and respect. Evelyn Grace Carter stood near the split-rail fence, her fingers tracing the smooth cedar wood as she listened to the quiet harmony of the land she had come to love. The distant lowing of cattle drifted across the prairie, mingling with the rustle of autumn leaves and the soft murmur of the evening breeze. Beside her, Jonathan Hale rested his hands upon the fence, his presence steady and reassuring, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the fading light met the sky. "The air feels peaceful tonight," Evelyn said softly, her voice calm as the twilight wind. Jonathan smiled gently. "Harvest has been generous," he replied. "The land is at rest." She inclined her head slightly, her serene expression touched with quiet reflection. "So are the hearts of those who once doubted," she whispered. In Dry Creek, the schoolhouse bearing her name stood proudly at the center of town, its white-painted walls gleaming beneath the afternoon sun. Children's laughter echoed across the square each day as they learned their letters and numbers, guided by teachers who spoke often of compassion and humility. Within its walls hung a simple plaque carved from polished oak, its inscription a reminder of the lesson that had transformed the town. True vision is born not of sight, but of understanding. Travelers passing through the region paused to admire the school, carrying its story across distant counties, where it became a beacon of hope in a frontier often shaped by hardship and division. On a crisp autumn afternoon, wagons gathered in Dry Creek for the annual Harvest Festival, their wheels lining the dusty street beneath banners of gold and white. Families filled the town square with music and laughter, and the aroma of fresh bread and spice cider drifted through the warm air. At the heart of the celebration stood Evelyn and Jonathan, welcomed as honored guests. Sheriff Douglas Hale greeted them with a proud smile, while the mayor bowed his head in respectful acknowledgement. "This town stands as it does today because of you," the mayor said earnestly. Evelyn shook her head gently, her smile warm with humility. "Because of all of us," she replied. "Change begins when hearts choose kindness." As the sun dipped lower, lanterns flickered to life along the boardwalk, casting a soft glow over the gathering. A group of schoolchildren stepped forward, their young voices rising in a simple song of gratitude, their melody carried gently across the square. When they finished, a small girl approached Evelyn and placed a wreath of wildflowers in her hands. "You taught us how to see," the child said softly. Evelyn's fingers brushed the delicate petals, and her smile shone with quiet joy. And you will teach others, she answered. That is how light endures. As evening settled over the prairie, the distant toll of the church bell echoed beneath a sky ablaze with stars, its solemn chime drifting across the land like a blessing. Jonathan guided Evelyn onto the wooden boardwalk, their hands entwined as they listened to the music of the festival and the laughter of a community reborn. The town that had once whispered with scorn now stood united in gratitude, its people bound together by the enduring power of compassion. Do you hear it? Jonathan asked gently. Evelyn lifted her face toward the night sky, her expression peaceful and radiant. Yes, she replied. It sounds like harmony. And as the lanterns flickered beneath the vast Texas heavens, the story of a blind bride who saw with her heart continued to illuminate the frontier, reminding all who heard it that forgiveness transforms, dignity endures, and true justice rides not on the thunder of guns, but on the quiet strength of grace. Years passed gently across the Texas prairie, each season painting the land with its own quiet beauty, until time itself seemed to move in harmony with the steady turning of the windmill at the Hale Ranch. The endless sky stretched wide and clear above fields of golden grain, and the warm breeze carried the scent of lavender and sun-warmed earth across the rolling hills. The ranch had grown into a haven of peace and purpose, its fences strong, its pastures thriving, and its home filled with laughter and quiet dignity. Evelyn Grace Carter stood once more upon the familiar porch, her fingers resting lightly upon the smooth cedar railing, as she listened to the distant melody of meadowlarks greeting the dawn. Though her eyes remained unseeing, her face glowed with serenity, reflecting a life shaped not by darkness, but by courage, faith, and grace. Beside her, Jonathan Hale placed a gentle hand over hers, his presence steadfast as ever, his voice warm with affection. The sun is rising, he said softly. Evelyn smiled, tilting her face toward the gentle warmth that brushed her skin. I can feel it, she replied. It feels like hope. Beyond the ranch, the town of Dry Creek stood transformed by the lessons of humility and compassion learned over the years. The schoolhouse bearing her name continued to welcome generations of children, its white walls glowing beneath the Texas sun, its doors open to all who sought knowledge and understanding. Within its halls, young voices recited their lessons, and teachers spoke often of kindness, reminding every child that true vision begins in the heart. Travelers passing through the frontier carried the story of Dry Creek far and wide, telling of a town that had once judged unjustly, yet found redemption through sincerity and change. One bright spring morning, as wildflowers blossomed along the dusty road, the townspeople gathered once more at the Hale Ranch, not in remorse but in gratitude. Wagons lined the fields, their wheels glinting in the sunlight, and families stood together with smiles that spoke of respect rather than regret. Sheriff Douglas Hale approached with a proud expression, tipping his hat as he greeted the couple. Mrs. Hale, he said warmly, the people of Dry Creek wish to thank you once more, for you have shown us how to see beyond ourselves. Evelyn inclined her head gently, her voice calm and radiant. You found your way because your hearts were willing, she replied. That is the truest form of sight. A young teacher stepped forward with a small group of children, their hands clasped respectfully. One child offered Evelyn a carefully bound book, its cover embossed with gold lettering. It is a record of your story, the teacher explained softly, so future generations may remember what compassion can accomplish. Evelyn accepted the book with reverence, her fingers tracing the delicate lettering as a smile touched her lips. May they learn not from my story, she said, but from their own choices to be kind. As the gathering dispersed, laughter and conversation filled the air, carried gently across the prairie by the whispering wind. The distant church bell rang from Dry Creek, its clear chime echoing beneath the boundless Texas sky like a hymn of unity and renewal. Jonathan guided Evelyn toward the edge of the porch, where they stood together in peaceful silence, their hands entwined as they listened to the living song of the frontier. The prairie stretched endlessly before them, golden and serene, a testament to resilience and grace. Do you hear it? Jonathan asked quietly. Evelyn smiled, her face lifted toward the breeze. Yes, she replied. It sounds like a world at peace. The sun climbed higher, casting its radiant light across the land, illuminating every field, every home, and every heart it touched. And in that gentle glow, The legacy of a blind bride who saw with her heart endured as a beacon of hope upon the frontier. For in a land once shadowed by prejudice, compassion had become its guiding star, and justice had arrived not with the thunder of gunfire, but with the quiet strength of dignity and forgiveness. And as the wind carried its timeless whisper across the Texas plains, it told a truth that would never fade, that out here, beneath the endless sky, true justice does not need words, it only needs a heart brave enough to remain kind.